Ayakwe, I'm Alita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I will be talking about the best of 2022. What I mean by best of is the following: my favorite graphic novels, my top nonfiction, my favorite fictional reads of 2022. So these were originally going to be 3 separate videos, but I found that I ultimately felt like I was talking about nearly all the books that I read in 2022 and just didn't want to do that. So I decided to do a conglomerate of sorts of graphic novel, graphic novel, nonfiction, and fiction, and tell you my 5 best from those videos. So here we go. My favorite graphic novels of 2022. So originally this was going to be put into like my favorite books of 2022, but I'm taking a page from Kayla's book and kind of just separating things out, just because it makes a bit more sense to me. Graphic novels hit, I feel like, a little differently than regular books. And I would like to be able to talk about it without going into too long of a video. So I will lump some together just because there were a couple artists that I ended up reading through together. So like the first one is actually Sarah Anderson. The first one I read was her second collection of Sarah Scribbles, and that is A Big Mushy Happy Lump. And then the third one was, or the second one that I read for the year was the third one, Herding Cats, a Sarah Scribbles collection. I believe this is her third one, this is her second, but ultimately Sarah Anderson is a webcomic, and she has published 3 or 4 of these now. I believe there's 4 out now, but this is the first one, Adulthood is a Myth, that I read and have reread throughout my life. But yeah, then we have these 2. I appreciate Sarah Anderson's work particularly because they tend to speak to me. She much ends up I feel like she voices a lot of things that introverts want to say, for instance, and kind of pokes fun at it of not knowing how to people, not knowing how to adult. And a lot of it is very relatable. And in particular, in these later collections, she also goes into some personal history with herself. With this one, Big Mushy Happy Lump, she talks about not quite basically social anxiety and how she handles it. And then in Herding Cats, she talks about being an artist and having to feel like you need to produce all the time, etc. And so there's a lot of things in Sarah Anderson's work that speak to me particularly, so I've always enjoyed her work. And I know that recently she put out an opinion piece in the New York Times regarding AI stealing, essentially, work. So she did an opinion piece essay that I will link down below, but it's called "The Alt-Right Manipulated My Comic, Then AI Claimed It." So I'm actually not sure where this one went, but I will show it here. That is The Wanderer by Peter Van Den End. I don't think I spelled that right. But basically this is I would call it a graphic novel. There's no words to it. So basically it is gorgeous, gorgeous illustrations. And we're following a paper boat and its journey throughout the oceans, essentially. And it is gorgeous artwork. But I absolutely loved it. And it was just stunning. I love the detail work. The fact that it was just monochromatic. It was just gorgeous. I absolutely loved it. It definitely stood out to me. Another one that stood out was Coming Back by Jessie Zabarski. This is following a sapphic relationship of these 2 women who live on an island. One woman in particular has these magical abilities that definitely help out their village on this island. Her partner, who doesn't have any magical abilities, feels like she can't help in the same way. So when in one of their ancient domains that is on this island, there is some kind of vapor that is exuding, and so she feels, because she doesn't have any magical abilities to be able to help out the village, that this is the way she can help out her community in going and investigating this. While she's gone, her magical partner, who ends up giving into temptation and breaks one of the village's most sacred laws and is rejected not from the only home she's ever known. The artwork in here is just absolutely gorgeous. It changes color schemes throughout the whole book, and I think it's really it's really homey, and it's really comforting. I love the style, but the messaging itself is also really nice in terms of forgiveness and like learning to adapt traditions into today's standards. Not into today's standards, but to be able to adapt traditions and not take them so much as like, I don't know how to explain that without actually like, I feel like I might like offend someone, but like I know that I face this occasionally within our own traditions in terms of like being able to adapt to meet some of the expectations today, or some of I don't know, to try to like look more into it deeply of like, why was that tradition there to begin with, and like how can it be, is it really so serious to, if someone breaks that particular tradition, and like how should they necessarily be punished for that? So there's that. Another series that I read was The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. On here it's gonna say Katie, they prefer Kay at this point. But yeah, that's the Tea Dragon Society, the Tea Dragon Festival, and the Tea Dragon Tapestry. I absolutely love these a lot. I ended up rereading the Tea Dragon Society. This was one that I have read before and still just absolutely love it. Basically, we are following two young women who, particularly that one, who is learning to be a blacksmith and is basically learning the art of something that is kind of dying off, and what it means to keep the knowledge going. So not only is she learning blacksmithing, which some would say would be a dying art, but she's also she ends up finding a tea dragon and saves it, and ends up taking it to the Tea Dragon Society, in which she learns more about tea dragons, which are essentially these tiny dragons that end up growing tea leaves on their heads and hold magical abilities within their tea. So the taking care of tea dragons is also considered a dying art form in this universe, and so she learns about that as well. It was really sweet and really cute, and I loved. Let's see, we then go to like the Tea Dragon Festival, where we learn a little bit about the Tea Dragon Society in here, mostly the main two who are in a queer relationship, I believe, and we kind of get them in here too. Basically, this is like a look into their past, and I didn't mind this so much. We are basically following another character who finds, who's like, I think is non-binary and is kind of just searching for what they want to do. They end up finding a guardian dragon after they've been asleep for so long, and basically are catching this guardian dragon up on what all they missed. They've like missed 50 years, and it's I don't know, it's been a while since I've read it. I know I didn't quite like it as much as I did like the Tea Dragon Society, because I was hoping to follow the same characters, and although this was interesting, I felt like it kind of veered off the path a little bit, but I still really enjoyed it. I thought it still had really good messaging. And then we have the Tea Dragon Festival, where we are following the same characters that we are from the Tea Dragon Society, and basically helping. This one is learning more about her trauma and where she wants to be in life, and this one, sorry I forget their names, is learning more about blacksmithing and is going to test to be an apprentice to a master blacksmith. So, but yeah, we're still learning. We're still learning a bunch. It's still very, very cute. Yeah, ultimately really enjoyed it. Really enjoy Kay O'Neill's art, and the illustrations are just to die for. They're super cute. The whole story itself is super cute. So yeah, I really enjoyed those. Another one I really enjoyed was Garlic and the Vampire by Brie Paulson. This is a graphic novel, the first in a series, I believe, or a duology. I know there's a second one, I haven't gotten it yet, but basically there is this little village and there's a witch there, and she has imbued magical abilities to these vegetables that help her garden. And we are specifically following Garlic, who's kind of anxious little creature, and within this village, far into the forest, there is a castle, and the castle starts billowing smoke one day, and they believe that the vampire who used to live there is now back, and they fear what that means for their villagers. So the vegetables agree that Garlic should be the one to go and see about this vampire and get him out, essentially. So it is very cute. Celery's a dick. But once again, I love the art style. It's very different from like the ones that I've talked about in terms of like, this is almost, I don't even know how to describe it. I love the difference in art styles. That's one thing that I really enjoy about graphic novels, is seeing everyone's different styles and just these magical components. Like this one literally has magic in it. The fact that these vegetables are little people essentially helping the witch. It's super cute. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a really comfy fall read. So I think I said in a previous video, I forget which one, that I had probably my goals video of like how I had like my reading for 2022 was like a third of it was nonfiction. That's not the case. I actually just looked at it. I don't know how I got that exaggeration. I think at one point it was a third, but I think that was earlier in the year. At this point in time, with like, I'm pre-filming this before the new year, I am at like 22.8% of my reading being nonfiction, which I still really enjoy. And for the most part, I did really enjoy a lot of the nonfictions that I read for 2022. But there were some that stood out more than others, and I just kind of wanted to talk to you about it, because ultimately I'm loving nonfiction, and I hope that others are starting to read more nonfiction, particularly as Nonfiction November is going on to its 9th year, and people are starting to realize that nonfiction can be just as fun and wide in terms of variety as fiction can be. So that's my hope, but you know, it might be another exaggeration. So let me get to my sheets. I still don't know where to put poetry. So the first one was my first 5-star of the year, and I may end up mentioning this in my top fiction books as well, just because I'm not sure where this goes. I would assume nonfiction, but it's more like really creative nonfiction. I guess poetry should be its own genre of itself, but I don't read enough poetry to justify making a whole video for this. So, but my first 5-star of the year, it was the first book that I read for the year, it was You Better Be Lightning by Andrea Gibson. They are a, I believe, non-binary slam poet who I've heard of since high school. It was one of my friend's favorite slam poets, and this was one of my most anticipated books for 2022. I think it was published in January of 2022. And ultimately, I have been doing this thing for the last couple years where I read poetry first thing in in the new year, and so far I've been loving it. And particularly this one, I thought it was really nice. This goes through a lot of Andrea Gibson's life and their feelings. I mean, it's poetry, it's very creative writing. There were moments where I cried because it does go through grief and loss, as well as their feelings towards homophobia, as well as like there's a variety of different things. I read it like a year ago, but it still sticks with me, and like it still makes me excited that this, my first book of 2022, was a 5-star. So I also just enjoy this cover so much, and it was one of the things that really had me wanting to read it. But yeah, there were multiple moments, like, and I took my time with this. I think it took a couple days, mostly because with reading books physically, I allow myself like an hour and a half before I, like when I'm in bed, before I actually go to sleep, to read. And I read fairly slowly physically, and so this took me a couple days, and I'm perfectly happy with that. I took my time with it, and I enjoyed being able to absorb everything that Andrea Gibson had to say, and really kind of sit with a lot, because there was a lot of emotions in here, and I really enjoyed it. This one I just don't know where it is currently. I was just looking on my nonfiction shelf, and I know I have it somewhere, but I couldn't find it. And that is The Soul of an Octopus, a surprising exploration into the wonder of consciousness by Cy Montgomery. I've read Cy Montgomery before, and I plan on continuing to read from them. Cy Montgomery is like a naturalist, a nonfiction writer, and I absolutely love her work. Particularly this one in particular, because it had to do with octopuses, and I love octopuses. So this one kind of explores her, like, basically what it means to be conscious, and how humans deem intelligence, and that questioning that, and like, as well as putting human emotion to animals, which tends to be like a big no-no in the scientific community. But like a lot of people are, I'm finding there are some people that are pushing against it, because like what we as humans deem intelligent is very narrow-minded. And Cy Montgomery's exploration into an octopus's consciousness was really fun. Particularly with this, because she ends up having the chance to, and the opportunity to, kind of integrate an octopus into her life by going to a couple of aquariums and getting to know these octopuses. And it was like another one that was full of emotion, and I absolutely loved it. There were, like, she was dealing through grief and loss after losing an octopus, because an octopus, unfortunately, specifically a Pacific giant octopus, only lives to like 8 years, particularly a female, and despite their eggs not being fertilized, they will continue to lay these unfertilized eggs and give up their last bit of life to make sure that they are healthy. So it was really touching and really moving, and I really enjoyed it. I remember listening to this at work and having a hard time with it, because I was tearing up at places. So the next that I absolutely loved was As Long as Grass Grows by Dinah Gilio Whitaker, sorry. The Indigenous Fight for Environmental Justice from Colonization to Standing Rocks. This is kind of just the history of environmental justice of Indigenous people, as well as the racism that is in current environmental that environmentalists, naturalists currently have been, and Indigenous people have been facing for years. State parks, as well as the current environmental movement. And Dinah Gilio Whitaker definitely takes us through it. This can be a little dense at times, despite it being like a relatively shortish book, but it is very impactful. This was another one I listened to. I had the physical copy, but I'm glad I listened to it because it was easier to absorb. I know this one was a Pocket Pages book club pick for Allison from Allison Pages, and I was so happy when she had announced it and that she herself really enjoyed it. But I would agree with her in that there were some really dense places in here. Dinah Gillia Whitaker definitely goes into the history of racism and into Indigenous history, which, I mean, I appreciate, particularly because so many people just don't want to know it or refuse to see it. So, as well as the racism that is involved with environmentalism. So, I really appreciate this book, and I think it's a necessary read for anyone who is going into environmentalism or is concerned with protecting the environment at all. This next one I had, I remember seeing in a local bookstore and being intrigued because the cover was very unique. And then a assistant of mine, was reading it and wanted to do a radical book club, a student-led radical book club at the university that I work at. And so that really made me want to read it further, particularly after it was published. And it could be a variety of reasons, but I work in an interlibrary loan and was trying to get them this book through interlibrary loan and wasn't able to get them this book. And it could just be that because it was a 2022 release, it could have been just too new for interlibrary loan, but we found it really fascinating because there were so many libraries actually that had this book that just refused to lend it to us. Like I said, it could be that it was just a new book and they weren't lending it, but I remember particularly that it was just really strange to me that because despite it being published in 2022, it still had been out for a couple months. And in interlibrary loan, we can see reasons of why a library isn't lending, and a lot of it was other, rather than like, oh, it's checked out, or, you know, it's non-circulating. Some of them had that reasoning, but a lot of it was other, which made me question. I don't know, it was something that we were both like, what's going on? So thankfully he was able to talk to someone in our cataloging department who was able to order it for him. And then I ended up listening to this, but I got a physical copy after I was done listening to it because I do want to go back through. And that is The Trouble with White Women, A Counter History of Feminism by Kyla Schuler. So again, this was another one that I listened to. I very much, I mean, I like audiobooks in general because I can listen to them faster than I can physically read a book, but with nonfiction in particular, depending on the narrator and how it was written, nonfiction tends to be very easily absorbed through audio. But this one in particular, I still have my receipt in here, and a bookmark, so that's awesome. But yeah, the cover of this book really enticed me because, like, I mean, this bright yellow cover with pink portrait here, but I really appreciated this book because it did give counter histories to so like we went through various different timelines and followed the white woman who is like known to lead the charge of a particular movement, and then we're getting the counter history and someone else who was actually helping or actually was the one that led the movement for this particular time period. So yeah, I really appreciated it, in all honesty. I thought it was really nice, and like I said, I do want to eventually reread this because that was one thing with this, is that we were going through so many names that it was hard for me to keep track. So I would like to reread this and definitely go in and annotate it at some point. So I like this one. I mean, obviously it's on this list. So especially as someone who, I know I'm a feminist, but I understand that feminism has, there's very much like a white feminism that has been kind of been dragging the whole name of feminism in the dirt. So as someone who wasn't sure where to start, this was a good book for me in particular. It had a whole lot of information. I remember talking to my mom a lot about it as well. So I'm finding a lot of these I listened to first and then bought because I'm more hesitant with nonfictions because they're so expensive. Next, I listened to Fresh Banana Leaves, Healing Indigenous Landscapes Through Indigenous Science by Jessica Hernandez, Dr. Jessica Hernandez. I actually met Jessica Hernandez. She was really sweet. Our Native American Studies program at the university ended up bringing her to our university for an author's talk, which I thought was really cool. So I actually was able to get my book signed. So and this is, so we the Native American Studies chair does a faculty book club. Unfortunately, I'm not faculty, I'm staff, and so things are very separate like that for some reason, but I decided to read this anyway. There's a couple of books that I have read because of that book club, because I heard of it and was like, oh, I need to read this. I was really glad that I read this, listened to this. I actually did buy the book first and was trying to read it physically, and had a hard time doing so, so ended up listening to it. I ended up stopping for a little bit because it brought up so much emotion that I could not listen to this at work. I could not do something else thoroughly while listening to this book. So I ended up listening to this book as I drove out to a camping trip that my partner and I take every year. So that I thought was, I think it's a really important read, particularly because Dr. Jessica Hernandez talks about the difference in the different colonialisms that Mexico, Central, and South America ended up facing comparatively to the United States and Canada. I wasn't aware of this. I wasn't taught this. So this was a really good book to let me be aware of that. It made so much more sense in my mind because there was just so much I didn't know, and it also gave me a different perspective in terms when it comes to non-native plants. So I thought that was really cool. This book shifted my mindset, and I really appreciated it. And listening to Dr. Jessica Hernandez talk about this book at our university was really cool. I really hope to be able to be a part of more stuff like this. It's something that I've been putting pressure on our library because it's something that, it was something that the Native American Studies Department was able to do, but I think that it could have been bigger if the library was involved, and maybe they didn't want it to be bigger. That's always something too, but it was like, if we can help each other. Mostly because too, because our university is going through a polytech change, and they're really promoting TEK, which is an iffy thing. I thought this would be a really nice book to get more, or a not nice authors talk as well. Excuse me, as well as a book to get across wider campus, wider attention throughout campus. So, and the library can help do that. So yeah. My favorite fictional reads of 2022. Sorry, I guess I said that kind of funny. My cat's hiding in my closet, so if you hear some noise, like, that's her just adjusting. What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is a not necessarily retelling, but expansion of The House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. which I have not read. I'm interested in reading it after reading this book though, because ultimately I really love the descriptions in this book. This book had me interested in T. Kingfisher's writing. I think I have several books by them now that I now want to get into to see if I like any of their other works or if this one was just kind of it. But basically, What Moves the Dead, we are following... we are going to this house and it's in disrepair because the lady of the house is sick and is falling ill, and it's presumed that she's on her deathbed essentially. The main character that we are following is a ex-soldier who's trying to come up to help in some way. There is an American doctor and her brother is there too, not the lady of the house. His brother is there too, and basically there's funguses all over the place that kind of has a mind of its own. So it was really interesting. Like I said, I really enjoyed the descriptions in here, particularly of the funguses and like the strange rabbits. It was really like eerie. I really enjoyed it. And the illustrations in this book too are really fun. I really enjoyed the cover as well as the inner cover. Okay, so the next three are actually going to be all by Mira Grant. I'm finding that I love Mira Grant, so aka Shauna Maguire. So Mira Grant is their pseudonym that Shauna Maguire writes under when she writes like particular horror. And so I guess the first would be the fourth one would be Into the Drowning Deep, which is a reread for me. And it was, I ended up bumping it up since the last time I read it, because I actually ended up reading Rolling Into the Deep, which is the prequel to Into the Drowning Deep. And it made me appreciate, and it's like, I also read their Newsflesh collection, which I will talk about here in a minute. But basically, I was just wanting all things Mira Grant. So I read Rolling Into the Deep, and then reread Into the Drowning Deep, and I really just enjoyed Into the Drowning Deep more than I did the first time around. And basically, we are following this young woman who ends up going onto let's see, how can I better explain this? There is a entertainment company that sends a crew out, and this is what you get in the prequel is that we get they send this crew out to make a mockumentary on mermaids. The crew ends up going missing completely. The ship is found abandoned, and there is a video that ends up being leaked of these mermaid type creatures essentially killing people. Everyone in society believes it's either a hoax or some kind of conspiracy, but the entertainment industry, or that particular entertainment company, knows better. So we are following a young woman whose sister was on the first ship, who is now a marine biologist focusing particularly on sounds in the water. I think, yeah. And she ends up being recruited by this entertainment company with her partner. It's a lab partner, not necessarily like a romance partner, because he also is a marine biologist focusing in on sound. And they like recruit them both to be on the second excursion, which is a true science excursion to figure out what happened to their first ship and to see if there was truly mermaids out in the Mariana Trench. We get a vast, diverse of cast. We have like basically a scientist on mermaids, as well as a bunch of other people who are using the excursion to see if there was mermaids, or to using the excursion to essentially make some ground on their own experiments, on their own research. I really enjoyed it. I really do enjoy the science aspect that Mira Grant, aka Shauna Maguire, puts into these works. It's really fun. It really just builds the world, and I really enjoy it. There's like multiple aspects within this book where we're getting multiple perspectives, and we're getting like multiple inputs. So like not only are we getting these perspectives, but we also get like little blurbs from a book that a character in this book wrote, and as well as like news feeds. It's really fun. So yes, I really enjoyed Into the Drowning Deep this year. And something about it last year, so the last time I read it, it was kind of anticlimactic. I would kind of agree with that still, and that like the big reveal was still a little anticlimactic, but there was enough like I still appreciated. I knew it was coming this time around, and so it didn't have that same build up as I think it did the first time around. So it was a bit more subtle to me, and I expected it essentially, so it wasn't as disappointing. So hence the upgrade. Third would have to be Deadline by Mira Grant. And this is the second book in the Newsflesh series, so I won't really talk about it just due to spoilers, but what I did end up really enjoying about it, second and third is going, okay, so the third favorite is Deadline by Mira Grant. So to not spoil that, I'm going to go ahead and talk about Feed, which is my second favorite book of the year. No. Oh my god. Okay, I don't know how to put these in order, because ultimately the other one that I absolutely loved for the year was When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill, which I had a feeling. But I think Feed is gonna outskirt When We Were Dragons by a tiny bit as number one, because I really did enjoy Feed. So I'm sorry, I know this is chaos. So let me talk about Feed and Deadline first. So Feed, I absolutely loved. So this book happens to be right here, but this is the bind up, it's Rise. And I still have not finished all the novellas that came with it. I actually don't know if they are all in here. What's all in here? Okay, so I don't even have, because Feed, Deadline, and Feedback aren't even in here. These are just the little novellas that go with the series. So Feed is the first one in the Newsflesh series. We are following a adopted brother-sister blogger team, along with Georgia Mason, who's also known as George, and Sean Mason, as well as their techie Georgette Mason-Ye, aka Buffy. They are a blogger newser team post-apocalyptic world where in 2014 basically there's a cure for the flu and for cancer, and it ends up creating a virus that no one was prepared for, and zombies are a thing now. Sean Mason, Georgia Mason, and Buffy Mason-Ye are a blogger team in a world where it's been 20 years since the zombies had first risen, essentially, and we are viewing society as it has adapted of sorts to this apocalypse. And this blogger team has been chosen to follow a Republican senator in his presidential campaign. So we are really seeing, like, getting immersed in like the politics of it, and they end up finding out that there is the conspiracy that has evolved for keeping things the same in the government. So it's really, I don't know if I explained that well or not, but I really enjoyed it. It was really fun. Like I said, Mira Grant has a great way of putting science into these horror stories that really make it immersive. I personally really enjoyed it. Even Deadline, which I would have to say is my third favorite book of the year, because it answered a lot of questions that I had that the first book didn't. So there was a lot of things in my mind that the first book ended up creating questions for me. So like, we get that the virus acts a certain way, which made me think of a question of just like, oh, so if that happens, does this happen? And in the second book, Mira Grant answered it, and I really appreciate that. It was really just something that I was like, yes, and it made me even more excited about the series. By the third book, there's a reason why it's not on my on my list, but the first two were really like, I mean, and I feel like I couldn't have Deadline without Feed, and really Feed was what gripped me, and oh my god, it was just great. I love it. I really did enjoy it, and I hope to actually get a physical copy of all the main ones rather than the novellas, but I have a couple that I still need to get through. Otherwise, I hope to do a full review of the full series at some point in 2023. And now my second favorite book of the year, which feels really weird to say and be the last one to do, is When We Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. This is a historical fantasy fiction, alternative history type book where basically we are following this young woman from childhood up to adulthood, and basically because of the oppression women were feeling, and the way they wanted to break out of that oppression throughout the world, there was essentially the Great Dragoning, and a bunch of women ended up turning into dragons, like not just cis women. And we're following this young woman this young woman when she was a girl. Her aunt was one of the women who were a part of the dragonings. And we kind of learn what that means for her, and why her mom didn't turn into a dragon, and why her mom kept it so quiet, and suddenly like her cousin is now her sibling, when she remembers that no, her cousin's not her sister, it's her cousin. What happened to her aunt? And it was like all these questions that weren't being answered for her, and it's like how that was working for her. So it was really and we kind of go through her life as she's like trying to figure this out, not only that of the dragoning, but also her sexuality. And I've heard criticism that yes, it is a very white feminist outlook on this, and I would agree, but I personally just really enjoyed how this book made me think, and it ultimately makes me want other books like this. And so, like Mira Grant's Newsflesh, because one thing that I appreciated was that the fourth book of the Newsflesh series, even though it wasn't on my top 15, ended up looking back through to the first book, Feed, I think it's Feedback, that was it. But basically we are looking at another blogger team, that are more diverse blogger team, and looking at the Democratic viewpoint of the presidential election, or presidential campaign, which I thought was really interesting. And basically it made me question of just like, okay, if authors would allow others, or even go back to offer more BIPOC voices or more diverse voices, I would think that When Women Were Dragons would be a really good starting point in terms of branching off. There were so many perspectives that I would love to hear from in terms of this book. And even though we get snippets, like that's one thing I really appreciate about this book too, was that it was very similar in the same vein as Newsflash, is that we're getting news cycles. We're getting from various different parts of what was happening, not only with this zombie apocalypse, but with the Great Dragoning, or in other instances of dragoning around the world. And we kind of get glimpses of that, and we kind of get diversity from that, but it still didn't feel like enough. And so it makes me want so much more. And I'm really surprised because like I read one of Kelly Barnhill's works before, and that was The Girl Who Drank from the Moon, and I wasn't impressed. Like the writing, it was interesting, but it was like it wasn't enough to like, I didn't understand what the hype was about it. It had a beautiful cover, that was about it. But the fact that this book made it onto my top 5 was like really surprising to me, and I think that's why it's on there, is because it surprised me. I understand it's a narrow viewpoint, but the fact that it had me think so much and had like, I don't know, it was just real exciting, and I really enjoyed it. I understand that it has faults, but like, I like thinking about those faults and how it could be better too. I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. So that is number 2, and of course number 1 is speed. Hopefully that made any sense. I feel like it really didn't, but okay. And that is it for my best of 2022. If you enjoyed any of these, please let me know down in the comments down below. If you have others that you would recommend that you think I would like, please leave those down in the comments below as well. I would love to hear them. Otherwise, if you made it this far, let's do like a confetti emoji. We've got through 2022, and here's to 2023. Yeah. Otherwise, I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading, and I'll see you in another video very soon. Cheers.